Hey guys, welcome to tonight's channel, where we leave behind the warm light of our familiar rooms and step into the frozen lands, where the wind howls like lost souls and snow buries every trace of humankind. Tonight, I'll tell you the story of a wanderer, a knight once known for his honor and power, now exiled to an endless realm of ice. There, he must learn to survive the White Death, seek allies among the wild, and confront his true self when all warmth has left him. Before we begin, make sure you've dimmed the lights, leaving only a soft glow on your screen. Wrap yourself in a blanket, pour a cup of tea, and let your breath fade into the mist of this tale. If you enjoy this journey, don't forget to hit subscribe so that every night I can take you farther away to places known only to the darkness and the snow. And hey, where are you watching from? Is it late at night, or a chilly afternoon where you are? Let me know so I'll know who I'm telling this story to, beneath the snow tonight. Tonight, we will leave this safe place together, step out of the warmth clinging to our skin, and walk into a land where every breath turns to mist, and every step is an echo lost in the blizzard. If you're sitting before your screen, keep your hands still, listen, and imagine the wind beginning to tap against your window pane. A small, steady sound, like someone's fingernails lightly scratching at the ice. That's where we're going, the frozen land where everything is so white it makes you forget your own shape. Imagine you rise from bed, your feet touch the cold floor, and you open the door. No city, no lights, only a pale glow where the sky meets the ground, and snow falls like ash from a fire long dead. We'll walk together, slowly, because the wind there cuts not just through skin but through memory. In that place, every sound is swallowed by snow. Only your heartbeat remains to prove you're alive. Some say this frozen land has no end, that whoever steps in is lost until time stops. But don't be afraid, I won't let you go alone. Imagine you're wearing an old fur cloak, holding a faint torch. That small light is all that separates you from the darkness. Beneath your feet, the snow isn't soft but sharp as glass. Each step leaves a faint trail of blood, then vanishes with the wind. Far ahead, through the white, you see a figure. You can't tell who, only that their gait feels familiar, something proud, yet broken. You move closer, and the nearer you get, the heavier your breath becomes, thick like lead. Everything here remembers the cold, even the wind cries. You hear a whisper, faint as a dying breath, saying this land was once glorious, where banners flew above ice-clad walls. Now only ruins remain, and in the wind still echoes oaths long forgotten. You look up, seeing a sky the color of lead, snow not falling straight but spiraling, as if the wind refuses to let each flake touch the ground. The feeling is strange, beautiful, yet suffocating, like watching the world through thick glass, where everything is so still you can hear your own thoughts. And then you realize the figure has stopped, turned around. His face is carved by frost, his eyes two shards of ice reflecting a fire long gone. No words are needed, you know, it's him, the wanderer, the one who left the warmth of a castle and now breathes only mist. But this isn't his story, not yet. This is the moment we open the door, reaching slowly into the darkness to touch a part of the world humanity fears to remember. As we cross the first layer of ice, you'll hear the crack not just of the ground, but of time itself. Every fracture opens a memory. Battles, vows, feasts where wine was red as blood, and faces lost to the storm. Some say nothing lives here, but I don't believe that. In every gust of wind, you can still hear the breath of restless souls. They walk with us, not to haunt, but to witness whether we have the courage to go on. When you close your eyes, the snow is no longer white. It turns silver, then grey, as if stained by light from deep beneath the earth. Because the ice here isn't just frozen water, it's the memory of 1,000 years of solitude, of voices buried under the cold. With every step you take, the snow tells old tales, and if you listen long enough, you'll hear a call. A small, steady call from far away, where the horizon merges with the storm. Don't turn back. We've come too far to stop now. That shadow, the wanderer, is still there, waiting for us to come closer, to tell the rest. But before we take another step, breathe deep. Let the cold tear through your chest so you'll know you're alive. Because where we're going, life is not a given. The wind smells of rusted iron, The snow tastes like ash, and the only light is the torch in your hand, a trembling flame in the endless night. If you put it out, the darkness will devour everything. So hold it tight. Let that fire guide the way ahead, where the night's fate awaits. He doesn't know he's walking into legend, and you're about to become the witness to it. And once we begin, don't try to find the way back. Behind us, the door is closed, leaving only the wind. Ahead lies the land of ice without dawn. Are you ready? Then let's go. They stripped him of his title in silence. No music played, no candle was lit to bid him farewell. Only the wind moved through the stone halls, carrying the chill of the north. When they read the charges, he stood still, eyes fixed on the frost-lined floor, where his shadow trembled like it no longer belonged to anyone. The cloak was torn from his shoulders, the medals fell, clinking with a dry metallic echo that rang through the great hall. A soldier bent down, picked one up, and threw it into the fire burning in the hearth. The flames flared high for a moment, then died. The stench of scorched metal filled the air, the smell of honor burned away. He said nothing. In his eyes there was no anger, only a strange emptiness, as if he had already seen it all before. When the great doors opened, the wind rushed in, snow began to fall. Not white snow, but grey, heavy flakes, descending like ashes from a dead sky. They bound his hands with cold rope and dragged him forward between two rows of soldiers. None of them met his eyes. They stared straight ahead, as if afraid that seeing him might awaken regret. The road leading out of the city was buried deep in snow, each step sinking into the past. The clatter of chains, the rustle of armor, and the howl of wind blended into a mournful song without rhythm. He turned once, looking up at the battlements, where his family's banners once flew. That banner was being lowered now, rolled up, replaced by another symbol. A few sparks from a torch drifted onto the snow, then vanished as if nothing had ever burned there. Above, the sky hung heavy. No moonlight, only the thick colour of lead. The wind blew from the north, carrying the scent of salt, the cold of the frozen sea. They brought him to the final gate where the wall ended, and the world beyond began. An old soldier stepped forward, unfastened the chains from his wrists. "From here on," he said, "you are no one." His voice held no contempt, only a weary tone, like reciting a spell long practiced. The man nodded. When they turned and left, he stood alone in the vastness. The gate closed behind him with a deep echo, like the lid of a coffin sealing shut. Before him stretched an endless field of snow. No trees, no roads, no footprints. Each gust of wind erased the traces he left, leaving behind a perfect whiteness, where all mistakes, vows, and glories were wiped away. He drew a breath, and it froze instantly into a faint cloud. No armor now, no sword, only a rough tunic, torn boots, and a silver ring they forgot to remove, the only thing that still reminded him who he once was. He clenched it tight in his palm, the cold metal cutting into his skin. The pain reminded him he was still alive. Far away, a wolf howled. The sound echoed through the mountains, breaking into 100 others. He couldn't tell if they were close or just the wind, but it didn't matter. Tonight, everything was foreign, even his own body. He walked on, slow and heavy. The snow reached his knees, the flakes slicing his face like blades. Behind him, his footprints vanished within minutes, as if he had never existed. Every breath was a struggle, every step a wound. Yet he kept moving, not because he wished to live, but because he could not yet die. In his mind, images kept flashing his father's face. The final banquet, the hand of an old friend gripping his shoulder, whispering vows of loyalty, and then that same hand, the next day, holding a sword pointed at him when the charge of treason was declared. It had all happened too fast, like a game of chess he'd lost from the very first move. He stopped, looked around. Nothing but white. But beneath that snow, he could feel something watching. Not a person, not a beast, the land itself, cold and indifferent, weighing whether he deserved to take another step. He knelt, scooped a handful of snow, and crushed it in his fist. The icy water ran down between his fingers, burning. "If this is punishment," he whispered, "then let me bear it." His voice was swallowed by the wind, gone as if it had never existed. But as the snow settled, a strange emptiness filled him, the kind that had no fear left, only silence so deep it hurt. He turned and looked back at the city one last time. It was so far away now, only faint lights, like stars fading from the sky. He knew he would never return there again. The snow buried every path the way home and the way forward. Each falling flake was a verdict from the heavens, slow, certain, absolute. He stepped into the white, without looking back, carrying with him the last breath of old glory. Behind him, the city still stood cold and proud, as if no one had ever been cast out from it. Ahead, the storm began to rise, the wind drumming like a funeral march. And in that moment, as the snow fell like ashes, he understood. A man's honor can be burned, but its ashes will still drift, still fall, and he would have to walk to the ends of the frozen world to bury them. He walked through the storm like a soul newly torn from the world of men. No armor, no banner, no weapon, only his body wrapped in a tattered coarse shirt, exposed to the cold wind cutting him with 1,000 blades. The snow lashed his face, thick and sharp, each flake striking his skin with a burning chill like needles. The wind screamed through his ears, no longer the sound of nature but the whispers of old spirits. Every step was a negotiation with death. His feet sank deep into the snow, soaked and heavy, freezing solid within seconds. When he lifted them, the ice cracked with a dry snap, like breaking bone. Step by step, he dragged himself across a white expanse, with no beginning, no end. Here, every direction was the same. Above, the sky was swallowed by dense grey clouds. Below, the ground was buried under snow. There was no boundary between earth and sky, only one world left, cold and blind. He tried to see farther, but his sight reached only a few paces before vanishing into the white void. His breath rose as thin mist, freezing on his beard and hair, turning him into a walking statue. Each breath brought pain, as if 1,000 needles pierced his lungs. His chest tightened, his heart slowed, blood thickened in his veins. He knew his body was losing heat, but the thought didn't frighten him. Perhaps the part of him that feared had been left behind with the city, with his honor. All that remained was will hard and unyielding as ice. He stopped beside a rock jutting from the snow, leaned against it to shield himself from the wind. But the wind here had no direction. It coiled and struck from every side, ripping the air from his mouth. The snow fell thicker. No longer flakes, but heavy clumps, collapsing against his warm body and melting instantly, soaking through the fabric. He shivered uncontrollably. His muscles stiffened, close to breaking. He pulled his hands into his sleeves, but the wind crept in, biting through the cloth, into his skin. He looked down, his fingers had turned purple, feeling fading away. He clenched his fists, forcing the blood to move. The pain stabbed sharply, but that pain reassured him at least. He could still feel. Far away, the wind roared louder, carrying a long, low howl through the mountains. He couldn't tell if it was wolves or just the storm, but it reminded him he was in a world that did not welcome men. A world of snow and stone, where everything lived by cruelty. He bowed his head and moved on. Every step felt as heavy as carrying a fortress on his back. Snow slid into his collar, into his boots, down his neck, cold as metal on bare flesh. He dared not stop again. Stopping meant death. The wind struck hard enough to tilt him sideways, nearly toppling him. He dropped to his knees, hands buried in snow to steady himself, feeling the cold climb through his arms. In that moment, he felt small, a speck of dust in a frozen universe. No one in this world remembered his name, and none cared. All titles, all vows of loyalty meant nothing before the storm screaming in his face. He tried to rise, but the wind threw him down again. This time, he fell flat. His face pressed into the snow cold, numbing, but when he opened his eyes, he saw the snow glowing under a distant flash of lightning, a pale green light cutting through the clouds, revealing the land for a heartbeat. His shadow stretched across the snow, warped, trembling. That light wasn't the sun, but the aurora, a scar of shimmering colour torn open across the sky. So beautiful it hurt. He looked up, letting the wind whip his face, and for a moment he felt both tiny and immense, the last living thing standing in a dead world. He rose again, leaning into the gale. Every step was defiance, a challenge to the storm itself. In his mind, the old words rang out, "A noble does not kneel before fate." He laughed, a twisted laugh, his lips cracked, blood spilling into the snow and freezing instantly. Ahead, the ground sloped upward, a wall of ice rising steep. He pushed toward it, found a handhold, and began to climb. Each slip drove his fingers into the frozen rock, skin tearing, blood flowing, but he didn't stop. When he reached the top, he collapsed, lying on his back beneath the sky. His breath came in gasps, his lungs burned, but he laughed. For the first time since his exile, he saw something beyond the snow, a faint yellow glow, like fire. It might have been an illusion. It might have been someone. He didn't know. But that light, however small, made his heart pound again. He crawled to his feet and walked toward it, leaving a faint red trail behind in the snow. The storm hadn't stopped, but he no longer cared. Within the howl of the wind, he heard something faint, a voice calling his name, or maybe only the echo of his own. Either way, he answered, not with words, but with another step. In that storm, among millions of falling ice crystals, one man still moved forward with frozen breath before his face, and a will burning bright in the deepest part of his chest. There was no sound left but the wind. It wasn't the kind of wind men knew, not the wind of fields or forests, but a long, endless howl, as if the whole world exhaled the same breath of cold. Each time it roared, the snow twisted around him, striking his face, blinding his eyes, erasing every line, every trace, every sense of space. He could no longer tell direction. Forward, backward, left, right, all were white, a thick, solid white, so dense even light got lost inside it. He tried to lift his feet, but the snow was like a bottomless pit, each step sinking deeper, heavier. The wind blew so hard it tilted his body. He had to brace his hands against the ground to stay upright. When he looked up, his eyes stung, his lashes crusted with frost, tiny crystals cutting his skin like glass. He gasped for air, his breath freezing into mist, then vanishing into the storm. There was no other sound, no beast, no water, not even his heartbeat. He tried to shout, but his voice was stolen by the wind the instant it left his lips, dissolving like smoke. This world devoured everything, leaving only the cold scream of the blizzard. Isolation crept into his mind like a living thing. He realized that if he fell now, no one would know, no one would hear, no one would search, no eyes, no souls, only the wind, the sole witness to his existence, and it didn't care. He kept walking, head low, shoulders drawn tight, trying to keep the small flame inside from going out. But the storm attacked more than his body. It gnawed at his mind. When all you have is snow and wind, you start to hear things that aren't there. Footsteps behind you, breath beside your ear, someone calling your name through the haze. He turned, but there was nothing. The snow kept falling, steady and cold. He knew it was illusion, but the terrifying part was that he no longer knew what was real. Every time the wind paused for a second, the silence between its howls scared him more. Because in that silence, he could hear his own blood slowing, feel his body freezing from within. Time disappeared. There was no day, no night. The sky and ground blended into one, and he drifted in that void like a speck of dust, lost in a white universe. He tried to find something to hold a rock, a tree, anything with shape, but there was only snow. It felt like being trapped inside an endless, heavy fabric, with no way out. His eyes ached, his vision blurred from the blinding brightness. He shut them, but closing them didn't help. Behind his eyelids, the white became a dull, glowing light spreading through his head, bright enough to hurt, so bright he wanted to scream. He opened them again, only to find himself still there, small, meaningless, a speck of dust in a storm that never ends. A thought flashed through him. If he lay down now, the snow would cover him quickly and he would vanish without a trace. No one would know. No one would remember. And the terrible thing was, that thought didn't frighten him, it comforted him, as if ceasing to exist would be easier than fighting the storm. But then, in that moment, he heard another sound, faint, thin, but real. The flap of his torn cloak, the hiss of wind through his collar, and the weak thump of his heart. A flicker of life in the blizzard. He clung to it, like a drowning man grasping driftwood. I'm still here, he thought. Though he couldn't speak, his lips cracked, his tongue stiff. The loneliness still surrounded him, but now it had a shape, an enemy, not a void. He began to murmur, not knowing to whom. I'll keep going. I have to keep going. The words were swept away by wind, but the sound of his own voice brought him back. He walked again, no longer counting steps, just moving. His eyes didn't search for direction. They followed instinct. The snow around him seemed alive, not falling from the sky but rising from the ground, swirling around him, making him feel like he was sinking. But then, through the white, something different, a grey shape, faint as smoke, appearing and fading in the storm. He froze, heart pounding. For the first time in hours, something broke the absolute monotony of this world. He didn't know if it was a person or a phantom, but he had to know. He lunged toward it, the wind battering him, snow flying in every direction, every step a battle. When he reached the spot, the grey shape was gone. Only a shallow imprint in the snow, as if someone had just stood there. He knelt, touched the hollow. It was freezing cold. The snow around it was strange. It didn't melt, as if held in place by something unseen. He touched it again, and a shiver ran through his spine. In that instant, he knew he was not truly alone. Not in any comforting way, but in the kind that freezes blood in the veins. He stood, looking around, but the wind rose again, erasing everything. The feeling stayed. Something, or someone, was walking with him. Not near, not far, just close enough that he could never be sure. He kept walking. The storm grew stronger. The white world still swallowed him whole, but now it wasn't silent anymore. The wind screamed, the snow hissed, and in the gaps between its roars, he heard something new, a second rhythm of footsteps, mingling with his own. Real or not, it made him move faster. And so he walked on, through a storm with no beginning and no end, carrying within him the weight of absolute isolation, an isolation that somehow knew it was not entirely alone. He didn't remember how long he had been walking, only that his legs no longer felt anything. The wind had howled for hours, and now it weakened, like a beast sated with blood. The snow still fell, but thinner now, light as ash. Through the white haze, he saw a dim shadow, not a person, but a narrow cleft between two towering cliffs. Slowly, carefully, he moved toward it. At first he thought it was an illusion, but as he drew closer, the wind shifted, swirling into it and howling differently. The cave was real. A narrow opening, deep and black, almost buried beneath the snow. He dug with his hands, his fingers numb like stone, the skin split and bleeding, but at last he cleared a gap just wide enough to crawl through. Inside was dense darkness, damp, and the cold scent of ancient rock. He stood still for a moment, listening. No beasts, no movement, only the sound of his own breath, faint and hollow in the confined space. He stepped deeper in, his body trembling as the chill seeped from the stone walls. But at least the wind couldn't reach him here. He sat down, back against the rock, forcing his breathing to slow, to steady his heart. As his eyes adjusted, he saw the rough walls covered in dry moss, and scattered bones perhaps of some long-dead animal. He didn't care. To him, this was a castle. He unfastened the small leather pouch at his side, the only thing left from the day of his exile. Inside were a rusted knife, a half-burned scrap of cloth, and a piece of old hard bread, cracked like dry earth. He held the bread for a long moment. His hand trembled as he broke it in two, eating the larger piece, saving the smaller, as if making a faint promise that one day he'd eat again. The bread was as hard as stone. He had to let it soften in his mouth before swallowing. It had no taste except the iron tang of blood from his gums, but to him it was a feast. He closed his eyes, feeling each crumb fall down his throat, a faint current of strength spreading through his fading body. Then he took the scrap of cloth, wrapped it around a dry twig he'd picked up earlier, and struck flint and steel to spark a flame. It took a dozen tries before a spark caught. The light was thin, frail as breath, but when the fire flared up, he almost wept. In that glow, the cave was no longer a tomb. It became a shelter, small, fragile, but the last place in this world that still accepted him. He stretched his hands toward the flame. The weak warmth touched his skin, then vanished like a mirage. But it was enough. He warmed each finger, watching them regain color, the skin still cracked, but not yet dead. The smoke reached his nose, acrid and cold, the scent of life. He sat still for a long time, watching the fire tremble and dance on the stone walls. In its flicker, strange shapes appeared like shadowed figures standing around him, heads bowed, silent. He knew they were illusions, but he whispered hoarsely, "You're sheltering here too, aren't you?" The wind outside answered with a long moan, part laughter, part lament. He laughed too, a dry, exhausted sound. Everything in him was dry now, blood, tears, fear. Only the faint warmth from the fire still rose. He pressed a hand to his chest, feeling his heartbeat still there, slow and heavy. He murmured, "Still alive." The word sounded strange, half statement, half doubt. Alive, but for what, when the world outside was nothing but ice and wind? He looked toward the cave mouth, where the wind slipped through, carrying snowflakes that glittered in the firelight. They spun, danced, then melted. He suddenly remembered a distant banquet where the fire burned bright, the wine overflowed, and music filled the hall. They had once raised their cups to him, "To your honor." And now, that same honor had burned everything away. He laughed again, but the laugh turned into a cough. He leaned against the wall, watching the flickering flame. It seemed tired too, its tongue shrinking smaller. He bent down, blew softly, feeding it the rest of the cloth. The flame rose again, weak but stubborn. He whispered to it, "Don't go out. Not tonight." Then he pulled his torn cloak close, drew his knees to his chest, and leaned against the stone. Weariness came over him, heavy as ice on his eyelids. Before sleep took him, he looked at the fire one last time. It reflected in his eyes a small spark of light in an ocean of dark, fragile yet unyielding. Outside, the wind still howled, but farther away now. The snow still fell, but its sound had softened. The world beyond remained frozen, but inside the cave, that little warmth endured. It was the first trace of survival, a dim flame, a piece of dry bread, and a man who refused to disappear into the ice. In his fitful sleep, he heard the fire crackle softly, like a heartbeat, slow, steady, and he dreamed he was walking through a green forest, warm wind brushing the grass, the sun still remembering his name. But when he opened his eyes, there was only the cave, the fading red glow, and the thick air of smoke. He didn't smile, nor despair. He just sat there, watching the last ember curl inward, leaving a ring of ash on the stone floor. He touched it, his hand freezing, but the warmth still lingered. He knew. As long as he could keep that warmth, no matter how faint, how unseen by anyone else, he had not yet lost. Outside, dawn had not yet come, but in the darkness, life had already begun to stir. The cold of this frozen land was unlike anything he had ever known. It didn't stay on the skin, it seeped into his bones, his blood, into every breath he took. When he inhaled, the air slid into his lungs like a blade, cutting deep and retreating, leaving behind a burning emptiness that made his heart slow down. His breath rose in thick mist, swirling before his face like the last smoke of a dying candle. He watched it fade, then form again, steady and fragile, the only proof that he was still alive. Each breath was a small victory against the death that lingered close. He looked down at his hands, swollen, purple fingers, the skin split open, streaks of dried blood frozen like thin wires of iron. He tried to curl them, but the muscles refused. The numbness consumed everything, then left only void. When he touched the stone, it no longer felt cold, because his skin had forgotten how to feel. The cold here didn't need to touch to kill. It crept into every movement, every thought, turning everything slow and heavy, as if time itself were freezing with the snow. Outside, the wind still blew, but within him, everything seemed still. His heartbeat no longer came steady, only faint, scattered echoes between long stretches of silence. He tried to move, hearing the faint crack of his joints, unsure if from frost or disuse. Inside the cave, the chill slipped through the cracks in the stone, crawling into his clothes, down his neck, sliding along his spine like an invisible hand. He shuddered, but his body no longer had the strength to tremble. When he touched his face, the skin felt like wax. His beard and hair were coated in white frost, his eyelids heavy from the weight of frozen dew. He blinked. Shards of ice fell like tiny crystals, glittering in the weak light of the fire. The cold was no longer just a part of nature, it was a creature, an invisible beast, patient and merciless. It didn't attack or roar. It simply sat there, coiled around him, waiting for the last trace of warmth to die. It devoured time as well. He no longer knew how long it had been. An hour, a night, a lifetime. Outside, the snow fell in rhythm with his breathing slow, heavy, silent. The world seemed wrapped in a thick white shroud that even sound couldn't escape. He looked toward the mouth of the cave, saw only a faint glow, uncertain whether it was dawn or dusk, for the sun in this land neither rose nor set. It only hung there, pale and distant, like a dead eye. He reached out toward the fire, but the flame betrayed him. It flickered, shrinking back, and each time the wind howled through the cave entrance, the light retreated, as if fearing the cold more than he did. He laughed softly, without sound. His mouth was dry, lips cracked, and the smile tore open a small wound. Blood welled up, freezing instantly a cold gag of silence. He thought of the warm days, long past mornings in the barracks, the forge clanging, the scent of hot iron mixed with breath and sweat. Back then, he had never been grateful for heat. Now he understood. Cold didn't just kill the body, it killed memory. With every passing minute, another part of his mind turned to ice. The names of friends, the sound of laughter, the face of the one he loved all faded, shattered like air bubbles trapped in eternal frost. What he feared most wasn't death, but the moment he'd forget that he had ever lived. He fought back by whispering a story inside his head. I was a knight. I once rode a horse. I once had a name. But as those words formed, the wind howled again, as if denying him. Once, it said, is the past. He gripped the rusted knife in his hand not to fight, but to feel something real. The blade was so cold that his skin stuck to the metal. He closed his eyes, listening to the wind beat against the rock, the only clock left to mark the passing of time. Each gust was a moment gone, a breath stolen. In his mind, the only clear image that remained was the fire. He stared at it, following each trembling motion of that fragile light. The flame was like his heart, small but unextinguished. It flickered, weak yet alive, defying the ice that crept through the cave. He held his hands to it, the skin cracking deeper, blood seeping out, but he didn't care. The heat seeped through his fingers, a gentle reminder that the world hadn't frozen completely. He leaned forward, pressing his forehead near the flame, closing his eyes. For a second, he thought he could hear the sound of ice melting inside his chest. Not real, but enough to make him exhale a long breath. That breath turned white, rising into the air, and faded. But this time, it didn't vanish completely. A small part of it lingered, clinging to the air, a faint, ghostly trace of life. He watched it, and for the first time since exile, he didn't think of death. He thought of warmth, the simplest, most precious thing. The cold was still there, still surrounding, still waiting, but he no longer feared it. He understood now. The cold doesn't destroy. It only tests how much fire a man can keep in his heart before being swallowed whole. And he, the wanderer of this frozen land, still carried one spark, small but strong enough to stand against a winter that could turn time itself to stone. The fire in the cave had begun to die, and as the warmth faded, the past slipped back in like a cold wind. He sat there, staring at the dying embers, and suddenly that red glow became the light of 1,000 flickering candles in the great hall that night, the last night before everything fell apart. Music played, soft as honey. The harp strings shimmered in the warm air. The scent of sweet wine mingled with the fragrance of burning wax. Laughter rose, silver goblets clinked. He remembered standing in the middle of that room, cloak embroidered with gold thread, a cup of wine in hand, and everyone smiling at him. They called his name, cheered, toasted, "To you, the protector of this city." He had believed them, believed in those smiles, those oaths. He remembered the man sitting across from him, the one who had once called him friend. His eyes then were bright, but now, as the memory returned, that light felt false, cold and sharp, like steel hidden in wine. He had raised his cup, clinked it against his, the curve of his smile like the edge of a blade. "To friendship," he said, and he answered, not knowing that within that toast already hid the taste of betrayal. The music played on, but behind the melody he had heard whispers, quiet conversations at the edges, glances exchanged. He hadn't noticed them then, proud and certain as he was. Now, in the dark of the frozen cave, he realized he had walked through that banquet like a blind man. He remembered his old friend's eyes as he stood, linking arms with the new commander. The smile gone from his face as he looked back. There was only cold in that gaze, colder than any frost he now endured. He hadn't needed to speak, for his eyes said it clearly. "You no longer belong here." He remembered the moment the soldier entered, knocking 3 times on the great door, and the noise of the hall choking into silence. The message was delivered. All eyes turned toward him, but none stepped forward. His friend was the first to break ranks, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword, his voice calm, almost casual. "You are accused of treason." The words fell lightly, heavier than iron. He didn't believe it. He couldn't. He even laughed, thinking it a jest. But no one laughed with him. Those who had raised their cups now averted their eyes, as though looking at something unclean. He remembered calling his friend's name, calling it like a drowning man, calling for help, but he did not answer. Only looked at him, eyes empty as frozen glass. Then the decree was read. The same hands that once clapped his shoulders in praise now gripped the ropes that bound him. They dragged him to the center of the hall, forced him to his knees before the throne. From above, the king looked down, old eyes, cold, neither angry nor merciful. "You chose wrong," he said. Just one sentence, but it shattered everything. The sound in the hall broke the rustle of cloaks, the clash of steel on stone. They stripped him of his cloak, his emblem, and cast him out into the first snow of winter. He hadn't looked back, but memory had preserved every detail. The slam of the wooden doors, the cry of horses, the faint laughter of the betrayer behind him. He no longer knew which hurt more, the exile, or the knowledge that the one who sent him away was the very man who once called him brother. In the cave, the fire crackled faintly, pulling him back to the present. He realized his fist had clenched so hard his nails pierced the skin. Blood welled up, dark red against the ice. He stared at it, a drop of crimson in the white, like the wine that had spilled that night when his friend raised the glass beside him. The scent came back to him. Wine, wax, and betrayal. He pressed his hand to his forehead, trying to wipe away the image, but the harder he tried, the clearer it became. He saw himself standing in the hall again, hearing the music, the laughter, the voices shouting, "For honor." But what honor, when those who shouted loudest were the first to stab? He exhaled. His breath rose as smoke, swirling, then fading. "To friendship," he whispered, repeating his friend's words, voice cracked and dry. The phrase hung in the air, then vanished as if the world had grown too cold to hold sound. He sat still, watching the fire die. In that dim red glow, his friend's face returned, clearer than ever proud. Lips curled faintly, eyes colder than snow. He didn't know why he had done it. Ambition? Fear? Or simply because he could? That question had followed him from the night of his exile to this moment, and he knew he would never have the answer. Outside, the wind roared through the mouth of the cave, carrying a long howl, like the echo of that distant feast. He thought he heard the harp again, but slower now, heavier, drawn out like a moan. He closed his eyes, trying to sleep, but in the darkness, the banquet continued. Silver cups lifted, wine poured, and the betrayer still smiled, forever caught in the moment. He turned away, leaving him in the first snow of winter. When he opened his eyes, there was only ash and ice. The fire was gone, but inside, the past still burned. Not with heat, but with another kind of cold. The cold shaped like memory, like betrayal, like the last look from an old friend. A look that made this winter feel like it would never end. The first night in the cave began with silence. Not the gentle kind that comes with warm nights, but a thick, heavy silence, cold, dense, as if even the air itself had frozen solid. He sat curled up against the wall, the small fire before him no larger than a palm. Its flickering light cast pale red veins across the stone, like blood still trying to flow beneath the frozen earth. Outside, the wind howled in waves, screaming through the cave's mouth, carrying long, haunting cries like the voices of lost souls. Each gust made the flame shiver, and his shadow danced on the walls, twisted, stretched, sometimes like a man, sometimes like a beast writhing in pain. He pulled his cloak tight around himself, but the warmth was gone. The cold had already crept into his flesh, deeper still, reaching the bone. He exhaled. His white breath drifted into the air, and when it vanished, a sudden fear struck him, fear that even his breath refused to stay in this world with him. Time seemed to stop. He didn't know how long he'd been inside, an hour, or a night that stretched as long as a lifetime. One thing was certain. The darkness here was not something that could be endured easily. It had shape and scent, and at times it whispered. At first he thought it was the wind echoing through the stone, but then the sound changed. A dry crack came from somewhere deep in the cave. He flinched. His hand tightened instinctively around the rusted knife, eyes straining into the dark. The sound came again, crack as if something were splitting open. Then silence. The air grew thick, heavy as a blanket pulled over his head. He held his breath, his heart beat loud now, clear as drum beats in the stillness. "An animal?" he muttered, glancing around. Nothing but damp stone and darkness. He listened. 1 second. 2. Then the crack again, closer this time, right beneath his clothes. His body froze, blood turning to ice. Then he realized it wasn't footsteps, nor falling stone. It was something else, a sound coming from within him. A faint, brittle crack, weak but steady, repeating in rhythm. He pressed a hand to his chest. Beneath the cold skin, his heart was still beating, but each beat made a dry sound, like ice striking ice. The heartbeat of a man slowly freezing. He closed his eyes, feeling every pulse slow, heavy, uneven. Each crack sounded as though his chest were fracturing, his heart trying to break free from the block of ice encasing it. He trembled not from fear, but from the realization that it was real. His body was becoming part of the frozen land itself. He opened his eyes and looked out. The mouth of the cave was covered in white mist, and beyond it lay the dead world. He saw the wind curling through the gaps in the rock, and each time it touched his skin, it pierced him with 1,000 tiny needles. He clutched his chest and whispered, "Don't stop." But his heart didn't listen. It slowed, each beat strangled by frost. He sat there, his back against the stone, watching the fire shrink. The wind outside sang like ghosts. Sometimes he thought he heard footsteps light, slow, circling the cave. He didn't dare turn his head, not because he feared something might be there, but because he feared nothing would. Afraid that every sound was his own, afraid he had begun to hear the voice of loneliness itself. Again, the crack sounded sharper, more painful. His heart seized, his breath caught. For a moment he thought he would die. But no. After the stab of pain, his heart thudded again, stronger, faster, like fire bursting through ice. He fell to one side, gasping, chest heaving. Heat pulsed from his heart, dizzying him. He sat up, his back slick with cold sweat, his hands damp and trembling. The fire still burned weak, but steady. He stared at it and noticed something strange. It pulsed with him. Each time his heart beat, the flame leaned toward him, as if answering. He reached out, holding his hand in the light. The fire reflected in his eyes, and in that glow, he saw his face hollow, beard crusted with frost, lips blue. A man no longer entirely human, but caught between life and death. He laughed, hoarse and fragile, the sound cracking in the small space. "You're still alive," he told himself, voice trembling. "And if you're alive, you must go on." He rested his head against the stone, closed his eyes, letting his heartbeat blend with the wind until both became one strange, haunting rhythm, the sound of life inside death. Outside, the snow fell heavier, the wind's howl stretched long, and sometimes he thought he heard an answer in the distance, another heartbeat, faint, echoing through the storm. Perhaps it was illusion, perhaps just his own heart rebounding off the cave walls. But in the dark, the thought that there might be another heart beating somewhere made him feel less alone. He closed his eyes, let his breath mingle with the smoke of the fire, let the darkness wash over him, and in that steady rhythm, that faint cracking sound within the silence, he understood. The most terrifying thing was not the cold, but the moment the heart went silent. Because as long as that sound remained, as long as it still cracked through the frost, it meant he was still fighting the winter, and that no matter how white the world became, it had not yet swallowed him whole. That morning, a dim grey light seeped into the cave like thick fog. He opened his eyes because the air felt different, less suffocating, but heavier, as if the wind carried something more than snow. The fire had long gone out, leaving only a pile of cold ash with a faint wisp of smoke. He sat up, his joints cracking, every movement slicing his skin with icy pain. Outside, the storm had stopped. The stillness was so complete he could hear the snow falling, each flake striking the ground with a whisper like breath. He stepped out, pushing through the snow that blocked the entrance, squinting against the brightness reflected from the white world. Everything before him was an ocean of snow. No trees, no tracks, no direction. But then, as he looked down, something caught his eye. A shallow print, half buried in the snow, the curve of a foot still visible. Not his. He froze, heart pounding. The footprint was smaller than his, but deeper, meaning whoever or whatever had left it was heavier, and not far ahead. The snow hadn't covered it completely, only a few hours old. He crouched to look closer. Barefoot. No boot marks, no drag, no armor impressions. The toes were long, slightly curved to one side, human-like, but not quite. The skin's imprint was uneven, with ridges, as though cracked or scaled. He touched it gently, and a cold different from snow shot through his fingertips, a living cold, the chill of something that had just left. He pulled his hand back. Inside him rose a strange mix of fear and excitement. After so many days alone, the thought of someone anyone else should have brought comfort, yet instead his skin crawled. Because if something else lived here, it was either stronger than him, or no longer human at all. He looked around. The footprints led north, along the ridge, before disappearing beneath fresh snow. He hesitated, then decided to follow. With each step, the snow crunched softly, the sound so small it felt like a crime against the silence. The farther he went, the clearer the prints became. Some paused, turned in circles as if the creature had stopped to watch. At one spot, he saw a dark stain on the snowblood, deep red, spreading and frozen into a purple-black crust. He knelt, touched it. Solid, recently frozen. Whoever it was, they were wounded and close. The wind shifted, bringing with it a strange scent. Not rot, not human, something between the two, the smell of wet metal mixed with dried blood. He inhaled, then drew the rusted knife from his belt, its blackened blade still sharp along one edge. His hand trembled, not from cold, but instinct. In this wasteland, fear always arrived before reason. The trail led him across an open patch of snow, ending beside a large stone. Behind it yawned a narrow hollow, dark as the mouth of something asleep. He peered closer. Long scratch marks ran down the rock, shallow but smooth, deliberate. Not claws, fingers. Someone or something had carved them by hand. He stood still, his heartbeat echoing in his chest. From within that darkness, the air exhaled in slow, uneven gusts like breathing. He bent low and stepped forward. Each footfall made a faint, brittle sound, like bones breaking. He raised the knife, eyes scanning the blackness, shadow layered upon shadow. Then he heard it faint, delicate, the sound of bones brushing together. He stopped, heart tightening. The air shrank, every second dragging long. He didn't breathe, waiting. Then another sound came, thump, thump, soft, steady footsteps. Not fast, not hurried, just constant. He spun around, nothing. The cave mouth stood empty, grey lights spilling in like fog. The steps stopped. He backed against the wall. Something felt wrong. The air itself had changed. His breath caught mid-draw. The feeling was unmistakable, eyes on him, not from afar, from the dark, somewhere just ahead. He squinted, and when the dim light from the snow outside flickered in, he saw 2 new footprints, fresh, right before him, perfectly parallel to his own. He hadn't heard them form. They were simply there. He stumbled back, heart hammering. The wind funneled into the hollow, brushing his hair. The metallic tang filled his nostrils. But when he blinked, The prints were gone. Only smooth snow remained. He stood still, his whole body strung tight. Finally he stepped back, slow, careful, never turning his head. When he emerged, he drew a deep breath, forcing his heartbeat to calm. The snow still fell. The light remained grey. Nothing seemed changed. But he knew something was here. Not a beast would leave teeth, claws. Not a man could not walk without sound. Whatever it was moved through the snow like a shadow. He lifted his gaze. The sky was still grey, but the clouds had begun to coil, swirling over the northern ridge the same direction the footprints had led. There, far away, where the snow thickened, he thought he saw a dark shape, small, slow, then gone. He stood listening. Through the wind came a faint sound, not the howl of the storm, but a call, distant, drawn out, like a voice speaking in its sleep. He couldn't tell if it was real or imagined, but from that moment he understood. This frozen land was not empty. Something else was here, and perhaps it had never left. He followed the footprints for days, across cracked glaciers and endless fields of snow, until he felt as though he were walking in circles inside a white fever dream. The wind screamed through the mountain passes, snow buried every trace of a path, and when the last light vanished from the sky, he saw them silhouettes standing motionless in the storm, as if they had been there for 1,000 years. At first, he thought it was another illusion, but then one of them moved slow, deliberate, precise. Their steps made no sound. The snow did not sink beneath their feet. As they came closer, he saw they were human or something close to it. They were wrapped in massive furs, thick enough that it was impossible to tell where man ended and beast began. Their faces were hidden behind white bone masks, revealing only their eyes burning red gold like embers in the dark. He drew his rusted knife, his hand trembling, but they didn't attack. The one leading raised a hand, slow and solemn, an ancient gesture of greeting. He stood still, heart pounding, cold sweat soaking through his shirt. Then they spoke. The voices sounded like wind slipping through stone crevices, merging with the storm, so that he couldn't tell whether it came from their mouths or the blizzard itself. He didn't understand the language, but every sound was long and low, carrying the weight of a forgotten age. When they fell silent, the leader stepped closer and removed the mask. A harsh, weathered face, eyes deep as burning coals within ice. The skin was pale to the point of blue, lips cracked, but the gaze alive, fierce, burning like a flame. He stepped back, but the man reached out, touching his chest, then the wound on his arm. The fingers were cold as ice, yet where they touched, he felt warmth. Not heat, something stranger, a pulse of life, of vitality, the rhythm of existence he had thought stolen by the cold. He looked around and saw the others approaching, forming a circle around him. They carried small torches, but the fire burned not with wood, it burned with a pale blue light, translucent like ghostly flame. None of them spoke. They only watched him, eyes glowing, reflecting both the light and his image within it. The man without the mask looked into his eyes, then pointed toward the distance, a valley drowned in darkness. He didn't understand, but he felt it was either an invitation or a test. He nodded. One of them stepped forward and draped a heavy fur cloak over his shoulders, still carrying the faint metallic scent of blood. The cold vanished instantly. His skin felt protected by a living warmth. He opened his mouth to speak, but they had already turned away. Without a word, without a sound, they began walking into the storm like spirits of the ice. He hesitated, then followed. The wind whipped at his face, snow swirled around him, but within their ranks the storm softened, the blizzard parted, as though yielding to them. They walked with no trail, no compass, as if they themselves were part of the wind, understanding the breath of the snow. He didn't know who they were or where they were going, only that these were people of the frost, ones who had learned not to fight the cold, but to exist within it. They stopped when the night turned solid and heavy. One of them drew a small blade and carved strange symbols into the ice, then planted the phosphorescent torch into the snow. The light spread softly, dim but steady, turning the world around them dreamlike. They sat in a circle, silent, only wind and breath between them. He watched, feeling that strange calm seep into his mind. No one spoke, yet he could sense their story without words. They were the snow dwellers, a nomadic tribe wandering through the storms, with no home, no king, only the north as their kingdom. They hunted through darkness, survived on beast blood and melted ice, and believed that fire was not born from wood, but from the souls of those who had died in the snow. When the blue flame began to fade, the man looked at him again, then handed him a small stone carved with a circle intertwined with a wolf's wing. He took it, feeling its weight cold, but heavy, as if filled with memory. He wanted to ask its meaning, but when he raised his head, they were gone. No footsteps, no silhouettes, only falling snow. The ring of blue fire still burned, untouched by the wind. He stood in the whiteness, his breath freezing in front of him, the stone clenched in his hand. Around him, the footprints were already gone, as if no one had ever been there. But he knew they had been real, the snow dwellers, the walking flames of the dead land. And in that moment, he understood. In this frozen world, not everything was soulless. Some had become one with the winter itself, and it was they, not fire, who were the true symbol of life. He bowed his head and walked on, leaving fresh prints behind, through the land where the storm had ceased to scream, but still watched him with 100 burning eyes in the dark. He followed the tracks of the snow dwellers for many days, but at some point they vanished like mist. Only wind and snow remained endless, formless. He began to think they were only phantoms, until he saw smoke rising from a mountain crevice. He followed the ridge, slipping through sharp walls of ice, and before him opened a narrow valley low, round huts made of animal hide, smoke curling from small holes in their roofs. He hadn't taken another step when a shout rang out, and bone spears aimed straight at his chest. He was surrounded 10 tall men in wolf pelts, faces caked with frost. They spoke that same language he had heard before, deep, heavy, like wind through stone. One shoved him to the ground, binding his hands tight. He didn't resist. His strength was gone, and to them, he was an intruder. They dragged him to the center of the village and tied him to a post in the snow. Children gathered, staring with a mix of fear and curiosity. Then an elder appeared, likely their chief. He wore a cloak of white fur, teeth strung around his neck, his eyes deep as stone hollows. He said nothing, only stared for a long while, then motioned the others to return to their huts. He was left alone in the snow, bound and freezing to the bone. When night fell, the wind rose, and he heard wolves howling in the distance. The sound echoed again and again, closer each time. He looked up and saw dark shapes moving along the slope fast, low, many. A pack of wolves. They came down the hill, 10, 20 of them, eyes glowing blue in the dark. They smelled man. The growls grew louder, bouncing off the cliffs. He struggled, pulling at the ropes until his wrists burned, but it was useless. The wolves reached the edge of the village, leaping toward the nearest huts. Screams pierced the night. Villagers poured out, wielding spears and torches, rushing to meet the beasts. Fire flared across the snow, golden flames blazing like fragments of Sunday. Watching it, his chest tightened. They could have killed him, yet now they fought for their lives. Then he heard a cry, faint, weak, from the right. He turned his head and saw a small child, separated from the others, stumbling through the snow, and behind a massive wolf, twice the size of any man, closing in fast. Without thinking, he twisted, pulling hard against the rope until the skin on his hands tore. The rope snapped. He sprang up, grabbed a fallen spear, and ran. The wind screamed in his ears, the wolf's growl rising behind him. He reached the child just in time, shoving them aside and raising the spear. The beast leapt, its weight crashing into him. Claws tore through his shoulder, blood splattering red across the white. He roared, driving the spear into its neck. A sharp crack, hot blood sprayed across his face. The wolf thrashed once, then went still. He fell beside it, gasping, his blood soaking into the snow. The child crawled toward him, trembling. Their eyes were dark, shining in the firelight. They said nothing, only placed a small, cold hand against his face. Then the villagers arrived, circling around. The fierce faces from before were now silent, unreadable. One knelt, checked the child, then turned to him. He saw the change in their eyes, no suspicion, only quiet understanding. The elder stepped forward, knelt beside him, and pressed a hand over his wound. From his cloak, he took a handful of black powder and sprinkled it over the blood. It burned, but then the pain faded. Warmth spread through his body, as if something alive had entered him. The elder muttered deep words, and the others answered in unison, their voices forming an ancient chant. Then the elder untied his wrists. "You are no longer a stranger," he said, speaking slowly in broken words, voice heavy and rough. "You are one of the snow." They lifted him, carried him to a hut, wrapped him in furs, and laid him by the fire. The smell of smoke, hide, and herbs filled the air thick, warm, and alive. He closed his eyes, his breathing steadying. In half-sleep, he saw the child beside him, eyes bright, holding a carved stone marked with a wolf's wing, the same symbol the man had given him before. He understood then this tribe was them. Not ghosts of the storm, but real people, flesh and blood, surviving in a world everyone believed dead. When he awoke, his wound was bound. Villagers moved about, none looking at him with hostility now. They placed a bowl of steaming soup before him, thick and rich with meat. He ate slowly, feeling the warmth flow through him. The elder sat across, silent. Then he spoke, pointing outside. "The snow will fall long," he said. "If you wish to live, stay." He looked out, snow swirling in the grey light, erasing the line between earth and sky. He nodded. No words needed. The elder smiled rare and real. That night, they built him a small hut. When the storm rose again and wind screamed across the roofs, he heard the tribe singing deep, strange melodies, yet full of warmth. For the first time in countless days wandering the white void, he was no longer alone. He had found shelter not only from the storm, but from the loneliness that had haunted him since exile. And there, among those with eyes like fire in the dark, he felt something he thought lost forever: the warmth of human hearts. In the days that followed, he began to learn how they lived, the tribe of snow, the people born and enduring in the cold that the outside world called the end of life itself. They didn't speak much, communicating with glances, gestures, and sometimes short, low sounds that drifted like the wind across mountain slopes. At first he understood nothing, fumbling as he tried to mimic them, but little by little his body learned before his mind did. He learned how to hold the spear so the wind wouldn't shift its aim, how to cut reindeer meat so the blood wouldn't freeze, how in the midst of ice, a human breath could warm food just enough to keep it alive. Each morning, they left the village before the sun rose, not to hunt, but to listen to the wind. Standing on a great slab of ice, they stood silent, heads tilted, eyes closed. The wind here was not just something that passed through, it was the voice of the world. It carried messages from distant mountains, from frozen seas, from the place where storms were born. A young man taught him how to hear the wind, telling him that each current had its own soul. The eastern wind was the voice of a child, the northern wind the breath of the old, and the western wind always carried the scent of blood. He didn't know whether to believe, but when he closed his eyes, he truly heard it. Each breath of wind across his face held a sound of its own, and within it, he felt the rhythm of something older than mankind. On the 7th day, they took him hunting. 5 men, with him among them, climbed the northern ridge. There, herds of reindeer lived beneath thick snow, feeding on moss between the stones. They moved like shadows, leaving no prints. He tried to imitate them, but each of his steps left a mark. One man glanced at him, said nothing, only gestured, slow down, breathe with the snow. He obeyed, inhaling deep, exhaling soft, and strangely, the snow beneath him began to quiet, as though it too was breathing with him. They crawled forward, hiding behind a mound of ice, peering at the reindeer grazing below. Bone-tipped spears gleamed dimly in the mist. One man raised his hand, and all threw together. 6 spears flew, no sound, only the soft thump of impact. One beast fell, the rest scattered in panic. He ran after them, drew his knife, and ended the wounded animal. Blood sprayed red across the snow, its warmth rising like smoke. He stared at it, heart pounding. For the first time, he killed to live, not to fight. When they returned with the meat, the villagers greeted them with quiet cheers, a small ceremony without words. They laid the reindeer meat upon the central stone, sprinkled frozen salt across it, and divided it among the homes. He received a share small, but enough to mean he was one of them now. That night, they made fire from stone. There was no wood here, no trees at all. They struck 2 black rocks together, drawing sparks the colour of fish eyes, then breathed gently. The spark caught on a white powder they called stone breath, taken from deep within the glaciers. The fire burst to life, not yellow but pale blue, burning steady, without smoke. They said this fire would never die so long as someone watched it, for it did not feed on air, it fed on memory. He sat beside that flame, listening to their stories. The storyteller was an old woman, her hair white as snow, voice rough but warm, speaking in a tongue woven of wind and words. A young man beside him translated each line. "Long ago," she said, "when the sky was close and the snow was young, there stood a tower in the heart of the world, the White Tower. It rose so high the wind had to bow before passing, and at its summit burned a fire that never died. They said it was the heart of winter where wind was born, where snow was called home." He looked around. Everyone was silent, eyes fixed on the blue fire, as though through it they could see the tower itself. "But one day," she went on, "men came from the south. They sought to claim that fire. They climbed, bringing iron and blades, but when they touched the flame, the wind grew furious. Since then, the storms have never ceased, and the tower was buried under 1,000 layers of ice. To this day, the wind still searches, asking those it finds lost, 'Who took the fire from my hand?'" As she spoke those words, a gust swept through the hut, tilting the blue flame, casting light across the faces around her faces of the living, but with eyes carrying the memory of the dead. He shivered. Not from cold, but from the feeling that the story was no legend. Somewhere, buried in this endless frost, the tower might truly exist. And if it did, it was waiting not for someone to steal the flame, but to return it. When the tale ended, no one moved. They sat, listening to the howling wind beyond the huts. He looked up, through a gap in the roof, and saw the sky unfold black and vast, where the aurora danced, ribbons of green and violet twisting like living silk. They looked like the wind itself, searching for its tower once more. He thought, if the White Tower is real, perhaps that is where I must go. For in the song of the wind that night, he heard something call his name faint, distant, like breath carried from beyond the clouds. And he knew that life among the snow dwellers was only the beginning. Ahead, where the wind never dies, destiny awaited. The day he was first called the Man of Fire. The snow was still falling, but the wind seemed to have changed its voice. It no longer howled, as before it was deeper now, as if listening. The tribe had accepted him, yet a thin boundary remained not of hatred, but of difference. They were people of the wind, and he was a man of iron. To them, metal was foreign, cold, and dangerous. But he knew, without iron, mankind would forever shiver before nature. One morning, when the fog still clung thick over the land, he sat sharpening his old knife in front of the hut. A child approached, watching closely, black eyes shining with curiosity. "It sings," the boy said, speaking slowly in the rough language that had taken the man weeks to understand. He smiled, shook his head, and tapped the blade against stone. "No, it doesn't sing. It lives." The boy tilted his head, then ran off. That afternoon, as he helped build the fire, a group of men approached, carrying rusted metal bars scavenged from a shipwreck buried in the ice. They dropped them before him, eyes filled with both curiosity and challenge. "You said iron lives," one said. "Then make it sing." He understood what they wanted, not magic, but proof. He looked at the metal fragments, remembering the years in the city where the sound of hammers, coal, and molten steel had once formed a single symphony. He nodded. They helped him dig a pit lined with black stones. He told them to gather dry coal and the oily fat of snow beasts, fuel that burned longer than wood. When the fire roared to life, he placed the metal inside, listening as it cracked and hissed, glowing red in the light. The people gathered around, silent. He took up a hammer, a heavy rock bound to a bone handle, and struck in rhythm. Each blow rang out sharp and strong, echoing through the mountains. The firelight cast red upon his face, mingling with the pale blue glow of the snow flames, stretching his shadow into 2 forms, one of iron, one of wind. When the metal cooled, he lifted it and carved upon it the symbol of the wolf, their mark. Now it sings, he whispered. The elder stepped forward, took the piece, examined it. He said nothing, but his eyes had changed. That night, for the first time, they invited him to sit at the center of the fire circle, not at its edge. They passed the forged metal from hand to hand, as though it were sacred. Then they began to teach him what they called the soul of this land, the way to read the wind. They said the wind did not merely blow, it had direction, rhythm, and heart. The western wind carried the scent of the frozen sea, the northern wind the breath of ancient snow. They taught him to listen not with his ears, but with his skin. "Put your hand on the ground," his teacher said. "Feel the wind moving beneath the ice. It carries the story of tomorrow." He obeyed, and truly beneath the frozen surface, he felt a faint tremor, like the heartbeat of the world. "If the wind slows," the man said, "the storm sleeps. If it quickens, snow will fall tonight." And so they taught him to read every breath of the earth, every motion of the sky. He told them about forging swords. They told him how to read the stars to find the path of herds. One day, he forged new spearheads for them, small, light, hard as stone. When they tested them, the spears pierced through thick ice and stuck deep, and cheers rang across the camp. But the elder only said quietly, "Good iron, but know when not to use it." Then he pointed at the sky, where ribbons of aurora danced. "The wind is the one thing you cannot strike." He understood. They did not fear iron, they feared the hands that wielded it. From then on, he put away the hammer, using it only when needed. And they, whenever they went out, always showed him how to face the wind, how to hear the silence between two storms. One night, as he sat beside his teacher, he asked, "Why does the wind never stop?" The old man gazed into the distance, eyes glimmering in the firelight. "Because if it stopped, the world would forget how to speak." The answer silenced him. He thought of the old city, where people lived among walls of stone and noise, yet no one heard anything but themselves. Here, in the land of snow and death, people still knew how to listen. In the days that followed, he began teaching the children how to sharpen knives, build small stoves that wasted no fire, how to keep water from freezing using iron stones. And they, in return, taught him how to name the winds, how to make bone flutes sing with the air. In each lesson, he realized something profound between humankind and nature. There were no victors, only respect. One morning the wind blew hard and the sky burned red, a sign of storm. The village prepared, he among them, raising barriers and securing huts. When the storm came, they sat together, listening to the wind roar like a drum. The teacher looked at him and smiled. "Now you can hear." He closed his eyes. In the storm's voice, he heard the clang of steel, the clash of snow, the beat of his own heart. All became one song. When the storm passed, the village stepped out. The wind had gone silent. Snow blanketed the roofs. He lifted his gaze to the sky and saw the aurora curve like a shining blade. He smiled. For the first time, there was no boundary between him and them. Wind and iron, two worlds once opposed, had learned to exist together, not through vows, but through a quiet respect, like breath shared in the heart of winter. One morning, the wind changed direction. Usually, the villagers paid it no mind. The wind here was always shifting, like the world's own breath. But that day, it was different. It carried the scent of burning metal, old, heavy, like ash seeping from the heart of the earth. When it swept through, the snow dogs howled, and the elders fell silent. He stood outside, lifted his head, and felt something familiar within that wind, something he thought had been buried with his past. That night, he did not sleep. He sat by the fire, watching the green flame flicker, the light trembling in his eyes like waves crashing against the shore of memory. Then he decided to go, not to seek but to confirm. When he left the village, the old teacher stood at the edge of the ice, not stopping him, only saying, "If the wind leads you to the old place, let it carry you. But remember, you are no longer the same." He nodded, then stepped into the white mist, carrying his spear and the iron plate carved with the wolf, the symbol the tribe had given him as the mark of acceptance. The journey lasted 3 days. Snow fell thick, the wind blew against him, and each step sank deeper into memory. On the 3rd day, he saw it, a dark mass at the mountain's base, half hidden under layers of ice. At first, he thought it a massive rock, but as he neared, he saw curves, joints, a wall. He knelt, scraping away the snow with his knife. The ice cracked, revealing carved stone beneath. Through the fog, an emblem emerged, a lion wearing a crown, holding a sword. He froze. It was the crest of the kingdom he once served. His trembling fingers touched the carving, cold, hard, but so familiar it made his heart tighten. Beneath the wall the ice had fractured, forming a narrow passage. He bent down and slipped inside. Within, the wind fell silent, leaving only the echo of his breath through the dark hall. The frozen walls shimmered faintly, casting pale reflections along the stone. He walked deeper, past a half-collapsed archway, down broken steps. Beneath his boots, snow mixed with ash. The deeper he went, the clearer it became this had once been a fortress. A great one, buried alive in ice. Torn banners, now nothing but threads, still clung to the walls. On one, he could still read the ancient script of the Royal Army Fort Miras, the northern frontier garrison. He remembered now. This was the outpost where the kingdom had once sent soldiers to guard the Iron Vein, the supply route that carried ore to the heart of the realm. They had gone north and never returned. Back then, people said they were lost to the storm. But now, looking around, he knew it wasn't that simple. The walls bore scorch marks, spears were snapped, and sword cuts still glimmered on the ice, sharp as the day they were made. Not the storm, a battle. He pushed open a door heavy with frost. Inside was the great hall, vast and empty, its chandelier hanging askew, long dead. Across the icy floor, something faintly gleamed. He knelt, scraping the ice away. A sword. Its hilt bore the lion's emblem, the sword of a knight. Of men like him. He lifted it, the ice cracking, revealing a blade still bright as new. When he touched it, memories flooded back the ring of the forge, the shouts of battle, the voices swearing never to retreat. They had kept their word. They had not retreated. They had died here, buried with their honor. He stood still for a long time. Then he looked toward the far wall of the hall, where something else stood out. A steel door, half buried in ice, etched with ancient words. He brushed the frost away. The inscription read, "The fire shall not die, the man shall return." He read it again and again, heart clenched tight. It was the motto of his order, the knight's vow. The man shall return. But they were gone, turned to ash. And he, the exiled one, the last, was the only man left to fulfill that vow. He leaned against the wall, breathing hard. Then, from deep within the fortress, came a sound low and long, like wind trapped in a pipe of steel. He turned. Beneath the ice, pale green light flickered, moving, alive, as if something beneath was waking. He stepped back, gripping his knife. The sound faded, then stopped. Silence again. But he knew this place was not dead. It still breathed, somehow. He climbed to the battlements, looking out across the endless snow. The wind rose again, louder, carrying a long howl, but now, within it, he heard something else, like the faint song of 1,000 sleeping souls. He planted the sword into the snow, knelt on one knee, and bowed his head. "You did not run," he whispered. "Neither will I." When he rose, he looked northward, where clouds spiraled into a great vortex, and pale light glimmered far away, like a column rising from beneath the ice. The White Tower. The legend the Wind People had told him now stood before his eyes, no longer a myth. He knew he could not return to the village until he reached it. Because if that tower was the source of the wind, then this fortress was where mankind's last fire had died. And perhaps his fate lay between them, where the wind had not rested and the fire had not gone out. He tightened his grip on the sword, the steel reflecting the aurora spreading across the sky. In the wind, he heard a voice, unclear whether memory or spirit, whisper, "You have returned." He smiled, eyes cold as ice but bright as flame, and then he walked on, leaving behind the fortress slowly sinking into the snow, a vast tomb for a kingdom long gone. He stayed in the fortress for 3 days, not out of fear but to understand. Every room, every wall, every carving in the ice whispered a fragment of a story that history had tried to bury. He traced the ancient symbols etched into the stone, reading the faded words, "For peace, We buried them here. Buried them not the enemy, but their own. From the frozen plaques, he found the names of old houses' names once written in the chronicles as traitors. They had fought against the crown because they believed the White Tower should belong to no one. He remembered the old teacher's words in the snow village. The tower is where the wind is born. Whoever tries to own it will lose themselves. And now he understood his ancestors. The ones he had once revered as heroes were the very ones who came here to punish those who dared to speak that truth. He knelt, placing his hand upon the ice covering a name. Under the pale light, the letters came clear. Sir Mairon Arcton, guardian of the tower. Arcton, his own name. A chill ran down his spine. He staggered back, heart pounding. His ancestors had ruled this place. More than that, they had exiled those rebels to the frozen lands, building this fortress to imprison them among the wind and snow. And when the uprising was crushed, they were buried with their own victory. He, their descendant, was now the one exiled sent to die in the same place his forefathers had condemned others to. The irony struck so deep he laughed a hollow, frozen sound echoing through the great hall like wind through bones. The cycle had closed a man of the blood that once commanded, now swallowed by the same snow. But within that laughter, he heard something else, an awakening. He was no longer a knight of the crown, no longer a man whose honour was defined by the lion's crest. He was the heir of both of ruler and prisoner, of conqueror and the conquered. He was the boundary between justice and guilt, the living echo of his bloodline's sins. As night fell, he lit a fire in the great hall, its glow dancing across the walls, bringing the ancient carvings to life. There, he saw two armies, one bearing the golden lion, the emblem of the crown, the other, the silver wolf, the mark of the so-called rebels. Between them rose the White Tower, light spilling from its peak, uniting both sides in the same glow. No victory, no defeat, only a world divided. He reached out, touching the silver wolf, then looked at the iron plate with the same symbol that the snow tribe had given him. And then it struck him, they were the descendants of those exiles. The snow dwellers, those wandering the storms, their eyes burning like fire in the dark, were the children of the traitors. And somehow they had endured, living on even after the world forgot them. They held no hatred, only harmony, listening to the language of the wind, feeding the fire that needed no wood, surviving in a land others called the dead. His lineage, the self-proclaimed men of fire, had been consumed by their own arrogance. He felt two bloodlines merging within him, one hot as steel, one cold as snow. And between them, the truth. There was no right or wrong, only men and the price they paid. He went deeper into the fortress, to the end of a long corridor where a sealed iron door stood. He carved away the thick ice and pushed hard. The door groaned open, and a gust of frozen air rushed out like a sigh from the past. Inside was a small chamber. At its centre, a stone throne. Upon it sat a suit of armour, motionless, encased in frost. But the hand still gripped a sword driven into the floor. At the feet of the armour lay a bronze plaque engraved with the words, "The last sentinel keeper of the vow until the wind forgives." He stepped forward and knelt. "Ancestor," he whispered, "the wind has forgiven. But have you forgiven yourself?" His words faded into the air. No answer, only the soft crack of ice above, like the world exhaling. He stood, drawing the sword from the armour's grasp. The blade gleamed in the firelight, scattering rays across the ice like the tears of time. He held it firm, then turned to look at the chamber one last time. "If you imprison them here," he said quietly, "then I will set them free, not with fire but with truth." When he stepped outside, snow was falling hard. The wind roared again, but not as cold as before. It felt as though thousands of souls followed him, not in anger, but in silence. He knew the journey was not over. Far ahead, the White Tower still waited, holding the answers to everything: his ancestors' sins, his own fate, and the question the wind had whispered through generations. Who will be the last to keep the fire? He did not look back. The fortress collapsed behind him, sinking into the snow like a wound being sealed. And through the roaring wind, he heard his old teacher's voice. Some are exiled to atone for the sins of their blood, and sometimes that is the only way the world can rest. He walked on. Above him, the aurora bent into a circle, a crown of wind resting upon the head of one who no longer belonged to the past, but not yet to the present. A man walking the path between guilt and forgiveness. The storm came not as a warning, but as the fury of the entire sky. From the moment the wind changed direction, he knew something was coming. The air smelled different, heavy, dense, carrying the scent of metal and burning ice. The snowbirds vanished, the sled dogs howled long into the distance, and even the village fires weakened though no one touched them. The elders said, "The wind is about to rage." But no one imagined it would be the storm of the century, a storm strong enough to erase this land from the map of the wind. On the first day, the sky went dark. Snow didn't fall. It poured like a waterfall. The wind lashed against his face, sharp as whips. He and the tribe raised more tents, buried the wind barriers, gathered dry fuel, reinforced every post. The children were hidden in caves. The elders chanted the old wind prayers. He stood at the edge of the village, fur cloak snapping, eyes fixed on the north where the storm was forming. The entire sky seemed to coil upon itself, a colossal vortex, black and solid, twisting snow thousands of feet high, and at its heart he glimpsed a faint blue light, a ghostly fire, flickering and alive. The wind screamed, turning into the voices of thousands of souls. Then the snow crashed down. The world vanished. Only white remained. Everything was torn apart. He tried to hold the ropes, but the gusts ripped even the stone stakes from the ground. A thunderous crack, the elder's tent was ripped away. He ran toward it, but the wind threw him down, dragging him across the snow. He drove his spear into the ice to anchor himself, blood pouring from his nose and lips freezing in the air. When he looked up, the village was gone. All that remained was a spinning white void that swallowed people and beasts alike. He shouted, but his voice disappeared instantly. The wind here did not allow sound to live. Amid the chaos, he saw shapes running, then vanishing. The shadow of a child, the one he had once saved from the wolves, was being carried away. He ran after it, without thought, without sight. Each step felt like slamming into an invisible wall of wind. He crawled, clawed, gripping chunks of ice, blinded by snow. Then he saw it, something moving within the blizzard, tall and black, not human. A massive figure, back covered in white fur, head crowned with horns curved like crescent moons, eyes glowing gold like fire in the night. It walked through the storm, and with each step the earth trembled. An ancient beast, born from the storm itself. He froze. The creature bowed its head, the air swirling violently around it, and when it raised it again, the sound it made wasn't noise, it was vibration, a roar that struck his heart. The wind carried that sound like a blade, slicing through the air. He stepped back, but it saw him. It charged. The wind split. Snow exploded. He threw his spear, but it shattered mid-air. He rolled aside, the horn struck where he'd stood, piercing the ice as if it were water. He grabbed the sword from his belt, the weapon he'd found in the fortress, and drew it. The blade gleamed in the stormlight, steel reflecting the aurora. The beast turned, charging again. He screamed and ran to meet it. When they collided, metal clashed within the wind. His blade cut deep into its neck. Blood sprayed, not red, but pale blue, glowing like frozen light. The blood hissed on the snow, filling the air with the smell of iron and frost. The beast howled, reared, and threw him far. He crashed, rolled, coughing blood. When he looked up, the creature stood atop a ridge, the wind circling it like a halo, mirroring the whirl of clouds above. Then it vanished, swallowed by the storm. He lay there, gasping, every muscle burning. Snow piled over him layer by layer until he was just a shadow, but he forced himself up. He couldn't lie still. If he lay down, the snow would bury him like the countless dead beneath the ice. He drove the sword into the ground as support and pushed on. He didn't know where to go, only that he had to find them. The Snow Tribe, the ones who had accepted him, the ones who might now be dying in the storm. He walked on, the wind laughing behind him, curling and tugging at his cloak. Many times he fell. Many times he thought of staying down. But each time he did, he heard a voice faint, steady, somewhere between memory and storm, a voice calling to him. "You have returned." He followed it. When the storm finally calmed, he found himself in a new land, where the snow rose in walls of ice. And in the middle, a hollow, glowing with soft blue light, he descended. Beneath the ice he saw stones etched with two scripts, one from the Old Crown, one from the Exiles. Two languages intertwined, like two bloodlines merging. At the center of the icy chamber, he saw something, not a man, not a beast, but a colossal form sleeping in clear ice, a statue or a creature frozen from another age. On its forehead was carved the lion and the wolf, entwined. He understood. This was no monster. It was a symbol, the spirit of this land, born when men brought war to the realm of the wind. The storm was not the enemy. It was punishment, the wind's way of making humanity remember. He knelt, pressing his hand to the frozen surface. Outside, the storm softened. The howling faded. In the final breath of wind, he heard the voice of his old teacher. The wind does not want to kill it, only wants to see who still remembers how to live. He closed his eyes, keeping his hand on the ice. And in that moment, he heard a heartbeat not his own, but the slow, deep pulse of something sleeping beneath. He felt no fear. He knew he had found what everyone else had forgotten. The storm didn't come to destroy, it came to awaken. Snow covered him again. The wind rose once more. But this time, he didn't resist. He stood tall, letting it carry him, letting it lead. For now, he was no longer the wanderer lost in the storm. He was the one who had heard its voice. The voice of nature, the voice of his ancestors, the voice of destiny itself, calling his name within the endless song of the wind. He woke to absolute silence. No wind, no snow, only a stillness so deep it was more terrifying than the storm's roar. Everything around him was white, blinding, endless. He didn't know how long he had slept, or if he was even alive. When he tried to breathe, his lungs burned, sharp as if sliced by knives. The air was thick, frozen, and every breath seemed to harden in his throat. He forced himself upright. On all sides, nothing but white. No trees, no footprints, no path. Even the ground beneath him wasn't certain it was clear, cold, and mirrored the sky so perfectly he couldn't tell which side was real. Above and below, the world reflected itself, erasing direction. When he moved, it felt like drifting, not walking suspended between two infinities. Beneath his feet, thin cracks spread like spiderwebs. Each step echoed, sharp and brittle, like the shattering of glass. The sound carried far, then vanished into nothing. He looked back. There were no tracks. The prints he left had already disappeared beneath new snow. The world was swallowing him whole. He lifted his gaze, searching for light, but there was no sun, only a colourless void without beginning or end. Slowly, he felt himself dissolving not just his body, but the idea of who he was. Who am I? The question rang in his mind, and for the first time, he had no answer. The storm had passed, but another storm raged inside him. He no longer knew which way led home, which way led north, or if he was rising or falling. The world was a broken mirror, and he was just a fragment lost between its shards. Suddenly, a loud crack split the silence beneath him. He froze. The fracture raced outward in all directions, lightning fast. His heart pounded as the ice began to groan deep, low, as if the earth itself was waking. Then the ground gave way. He plunged into darkness. The wind swallowed him, spinning his body as snow and shards of ice whirled past. He fell endlessly, until he slammed onto a lower shelf of ice, rolling hard. The world was still white, but beneath that whiteness, there was shadow. Black veins ran through the ice like dead arteries, exhaling cold mist thick as smoke. He rose unsteadily, limping forward. Every step made the ice crack, warning him that one mistake would send him falling again. He looked around, searching for anything, a landmark, a horizon, but there was nothing. The sky and ground had merged into one vast shroud. And in that moment, he realized the most terrifying thing wasn't the cold or the pain, it was absolute solitude. No sound, no movement, no life. Only him, a single speck adrift in a world time had abandoned. He tried to shout, his voice breaking from his throat, but it was swallowed instantly, leaving no echo. Panic drove him to run anywhere, nowhere. He ran until his body gave out, until every direction looked the same, white, cracked, empty. Then he fell. His body hit the ice, head striking hard. Blood spread, red and vivid, the only colour in that world. He watched it flow, drip into a fissure, and vanish into the darkness below. Then, faintly, he heard something, a heartbeat. He couldn't tell if it was his own or the world's. He pressed his ear to the ice. Beneath the frozen surface, something was moving. Slow, heavy, rhythmic. A deep, distant breath. And suddenly, he understood he was standing not on land, but on the skin of something enormous. Something alive. The ice was not dead. It was sleeping. And that was why the silence felt alive with fear. He staggered back, breathing hard. The ground cracked again louder. The fractures raced outward like lightning. Around him, slabs of ice began to shift and slide apart. He tried to leap across a gap, but his foot slipped. He fell, tumbling into a narrow chasm. He hit soft, fine snow below, smooth like sand. This time, he didn't rise. He lay there, gasping, eyes open to the blinding sky above. No direction, no sense of life or death. Only the vast, motionless void. All memories, the fortress, the kingdom, the tribe, the tower faded like fog in sunlight. He no longer knew if he was still alive or just the echo of someone long dead, drifting through the eternal frost. A thought flickered. Perhaps this was what the exiled souls had seen before vanishing. No heaven, no hell, only infinite white, where spirits dissolve into the wind. He closed his eyes. The wind returned soft this time, brushing his face like a gentle hand. He thought he heard a whisper within it. "Do not be afraid. The wind still remembers you." A single drop touched his cheek. He didn't know if it was melted snow or his own tear. In that infinite world, he realized something. Despair is not when you lose everything. It's when you forget you ever had something worth keeping. And with that thought, he understood he was still breathing, still hearing the wind, still existing, even if only as a grain of dust adrift in the eternal ice. He lay motionless for a long time on the endless plain of ice, until his eyes slowly adjusted to the blurred white light of the sky. And then, within that sea of haze, he saw something, a distant gleam, thin as a thread, faint, yet unlike the cold, lifeless light of snow. It was real light-coloured, pulsing, like a buried flame beneath the deep ice. He pushed himself up, heart pounding. The light didn't stay still. It wavered, flickering in slow rhythm, as if calling to him. He stood, staggering toward it. With each step, the ice creaked, the ground threatening to collapse beneath his feet. But he kept moving, drawn to the glow like a moth to fire. The closer he got, the clearer it became. It was no longer a streak, but a column, a white pillar of light reaching into the sky, fading into the mist. And then he saw it, the White Tower. The one spoken of in the legends of the snow tribes, the place where the wind never dies, said to be the soul of the frozen world. Now it stood before him, towering, immense, yet stripped of the glory those tales had promised. The tower leaned, its peak shattered, massive stones suspended in mid-air as if the wind itself refused to let them fall. The surface was sheathed in ice, but beneath the ice he saw steel, dark, twisted plates, jointed in spirals, not the work of nature, not a temple, a machine. He stepped closer, his trembling hand pressing against the frozen wall. It was bitterly cold, yet something pulsed within like a heartbeat or an engine. A deep hum echoed through the ice, vibrating the ground beneath him. He understood then, it was still alive. The tower hadn't died, it had only slept. He circled around, searching for an entrance. On the southern side, a great fissure split the base. He squeezed through, slipping into the heart of the tower. Inside, the air was different, thick, damp, metallic. The corridors spiraled upward, sheathed in frost, pale light leaking from the walls. He moved slowly, running his hand along the surface. Beneath the ice were carvings familiar yet strange. Some were letters of the Old Kingdom, others, the symbols of the exiled. Two tongues merged, intertwined, as if this tower had once been the meeting place of both worlds. He walked deeper. Every step echoed not alone but multiplied, like hundreds walking beside him, until he reached the center. A vast, circular chamber, high-ceilinged, with a giant glass sphere at its core. Inside the sphere, light swirled slowly, casting a soft white glow, the same glow he'd seen from afar. Around it stood rusted iron machines, thick pipes tangled together, and figures frozen in ice, motionless in eternal prayer. Their eyes were open, fixed on the sphere, waiting. He froze. The armor they wore, the emblems engraved on their shoulders, all bore the sigil of the royal order. This wasn't a sanctuary, it was their final stronghold. And the White Tower, it wasn't the spirit of the wind. It was a weapon. He understood now. The Empire had come here, building this tower to control the wind, to turn nature itself into a weapon, to conquer the north. But the wind cannot be caged. When they activated the tower, the storm rose, devouring them all. The rulers and the rebels alike were erased, buried beneath the ice alongside the power they were never meant to wield. He stood in the center of the room, surrounded by frozen soldiers, and felt the weight of it all. This was where everything ended. No victors, no glory, only silence and snow. He stepped closer to the sphere. Its light shimmered on his face, reflected in his eyes like a trembling flame. Inside, he saw visions faint, yet vivid. Armies marching across ice, banners whipping in the wind, the roar of battle. Then, a blinding white flash and everything turned to ash. He staggered back, trembling. The tower wasn't just a ruin, it was the memory of the land itself. Somehow, it was keeping the storm alive, so the world would remember mankind's sin. Then came the wind again, howling through the cracks, a cry that filled the hall. The light within the sphere flared, piercing the ice, flooding the chamber. He shielded his eyes, and in that blinding moment, he saw one last carving on the wall, a line etched in both tongues, shaky yet clear. When the last one living enters this place, let the wind be free. He froze. The words were meant for him, the last survivor, the only witness left to see the truth. He looked up at the sphere, its light now blazing red, pulsing like a living heart. He placed his hand on the glass. It was hot. Inside, he heard a whisper. "Free me." He pulled his hand away, heart pounding. Outside, the wind screamed, shaking the tower. Ice shattered, stone fell. He understood the tower no longer wished to exist. It wasn't a monument. It was a wound that had never healed. If it collapsed, the wind would be released, the storm would finally rest. But so would he. He looked up. The light was spreading across the ceiling, cracks racing through the ice, snow falling like rain. And there, within that storm of light, he saw the truth at last, that everything he'd sought, every answer, every scrap of honor, had led him here, to a tower that belonged not to man, but to the wind itself. He closed his eyes, drew a long breath, and stepped forward. In that instant, the white light consumed him, and the world fell silent, leaving only the voice of the wind, long and low, like the breath of the frozen earth awakening after 100 years of sleep. When the light from the White Tower finally faded, he collapsed into the sea of snow. Everything around him was silent, terrifyingly silent. The storm had ended. No more wind, no more thunder, only the slow melting of ice, reflecting the faint shimmer of the aurora on the horizon. The tower stood there broken, leaning, but within its ruin was something strange. The wind had calmed, and for the first time in generations, the north lay in stillness. He looked around, no sign of the tribe, no trace of the dead. Only him, alive, in a land newly freed. The emptiness brought both peace and pain. He knew he had released the wind, broken the legacy of war, but in return, he had nothing left. No homeland, no kin, no destination. He was the last of two dead worlds. He sat there, deep in the snow, gazing south where the sun never fully rose above the horizon. That was his homeland, the land of betrayal, where the throne still burned bright in the fire of power. His chest tightened. He could return, bring the sword and the story of the tower, expose the sins of the crown, force them to pay. He could be justice or vengeance. But inside, a whisper of wind spoke softly, steadily. "You've seen what happens when man tries to hold the wind." He He remembered the old teacher of the snow tribe, his eyes deep as ice. The wind needs no ruler, only one who listens. If he returned south, would he be any different from those who once stood within the White Tower, seeking to command the world? Would he repeat the same cycle of blood, honor, and betrayal? He lifted his gaze north. Far in the distance, the White Tower still glimmered faintly amid its ruins. Beneath it, rivers of silver snow shimmered in silence. The north, once called dead, unlivable, divine in its winds, now seemed different. The ice was melting, the water flowing, and in the air there was the scent of warmth. He thought of the tribe, those who had sheltered him, taught him to hear the wind, to light fire without wood, to believe that life could bloom even in the coldest places. Maybe they had vanished into snow or scattered across the north. But they had lived, loved, built, and if they had done it, so could he. He looked down at the sword in his hand, the last emblem of the old kingdom. The lion carved into its blade was faded, eroded by time and storm. He drew a small knife and carved into the metal one curve, then two crossing lines. Now, on the blade, the lion and the wolf were one. The symbols of two worlds, ruler and outcast, no longer opposed, but united. He planted the sword into the snow. "I'm not going back," he said softly, his voice breaking into the emptiness. "The south chose its path. I choose the north." His words dissolved into the air, carried away like a blessing. He rose, facing the far mountains where the snow was thinning to reveal grey stone, the first sign of living ground. He knew if he stayed, he would die. But to die where he belonged, among wind and silence, was better than living among those who kill in the name of honor. He began walking north where no one had ever gone. With every step, the snow sank beneath his boots, but the wind no longer resisted him. It pushed gently at his back, like an unseen hand. Along the way he gathered what remained of the tribe, a bone mask, a glowing torch, scraps of hide. He built a small stone pillar in the snow and carved upon it their old mark, a circle within a wolf's wing. Beneath it, he added a single line, written in both tongues: "Where the wind is free, humanity can begin again." When the sun rose in the east, its light scattered through the broken ice, forming a halo around the fallen White Tower. He stood there for a long time, watching that light, and for the first time, he smiled. Not the smile of a victor, but of someone who finally understood. Sometimes, the only victory is to let go. He turned and walked away. With each step, the wind whispered softly behind him, like a farewell. Above, the aurora stretched across the sky, its ribbons of color weaving together like threads, a bridge of wind between heaven and earth, between past and present. He walked until his shadow merged with that light. Behind him, the south faded, buried beneath snow and memory. Before him, the north opened wide, endless, untouched. There was no throne, no crown, only the silence of a world reborn. And in the first breath of the new wind, he heard something faint, distant, familiar, the laughter of children, the crackle of fire, and somewhere in that vastness, the voices of those who once walked these frozen lands, now carried away, free at last. The wind had changed. After the fall of the White Tower, the entire north lay silent for many days. And then, slowly, the first sounds of life returned: the drip of melting ice, the trickle of water from the cliffs, the soft steps of snow beasts wandering in search of shelter. He walked through that landscape like a man waking from a long dream. The wind no longer howled, the snow no longer tore flesh, only the breath of a world being reborn. But he knew this peace would not last unless humanity learned to live with the wind, not against it. On his way back down to the lowlands, he met scattered survivors of the snow tribe. They were broken after the great storm, homes lost, loved ones gone, but their eyes still burned with fire. When they saw him, the exile they had once saved, the man who vanished into the blizzard and returned, bearing the silence of the wind, and a strange light in his eyes, they did not look at him with fear, but with belief. They had thought him dead. Now he had returned from the storm, carrying something the north had forgotten: calm. To them, he was no longer an outsider. They called him the bearer of the north's new breath. At first, he refused, saying he was only a survivor. But in their gaze, he saw something: not worship, but hope. And hope, he realized, was rarer than fire in snow. He stayed, helping them rebuild their first refuge. Gone were the flimsy hide tents. He helped them raise low walls of ice stone, foundations for a village that could face the wind without hiding from it. He taught them how to forge ice with stone fire, to create a material clear as glass but hard as steel. They laughed at first, doubting that transparent stone could hold against the wind. But when the first wall stood through a night of gales, their laughter turned to reverence. Other survivors began to arrive, drawn by the rumor of a village with walls of ice, fire that never died, and a man who could make the wind grow gentle. He did not call himself king nor leader. He simply said, "I did not come to rule, I came to rebuild." And so they gave him another name, the Keeper of the Wind. Each day he worked beside them, carving pillars and etching into them the ancient signs the tribe used to pray for peace. Beside those, he added the letters of the Old Kingdom, the language once used to command, now used to remember. The two scripts blended together, just as he had once joined the lion and the wolf upon his sword. He taught them to forge iron not for war, but for tools. To light fires not to destroy, but to warm. To listen to the wind, to know when storms would come, when the ice would break. And they, in turn, taught him the old tongue that the wind whispered through the rocks, how to read clouds to tell the seasons, how to scatter ash upon snow to hold heat. Slowly, they became one. No longer separate tribes, only the people of the wind. When the first season passed, he stood upon the ice wall and looked down at the village roofs, smoke, laughter. He thought of the south, the golden castles, the torches blazing on the ramparts, and understood. There, men built with stone to prove power. Here, they built with ice to prove life. One night, a young man asked him, "Will you ever go back? To take revenge on those who betrayed you?" He was silent for a long time. Then he said, "Revenge is fire, and fire burns out. Building is breath, and breath never stops." Those words spread across the village, carved into the great gate. The breath of the wind is life, not war. From then on, they no longer saw him as savior, but as the one who began a new age for the frozen world. They built a tower at the village's heart, not tall, not of steel, but of pure ice blocks stacked together. He forbade them to raise it too high. "Let it never touch the sky," he said. "Only high enough for the wind to pass through." And when it did, the tower sang not with a scream, but a note, long, clear, like the song of breath itself. They called it the Voice of the North. Every night, he climbed the tower's peak and gazed toward the horizon, where the white tower once stood. Its ruins now just a faint mark where the ice had yet to melt, a weak glimmer flashing whenever the aurora crossed. He knew the old could not be erased, but it could be learned from. The old tower had been a symbol of control, the new one, of existence. Together, they were two notes in the same melody. Then another winter came. The storms returned, fiercer than before. But this time, when the wind struck the ice walls, the village held. The blue torches still burned. The children still laughed. The wind was no longer an enemy, but a test. When the storm passed, they emerged together, none dead, none lost. He looked around and felt something he had never known, peace. And he knew then he had chosen right. No vengeance, no return. Only rebuilding. For some victories require no blood, and some kingdoms, no thrones. He planted his sword atop the wall, leaving it there as a flag of unity. The wind blew through its blade, singing, blending with the song of the tower a harmony that carried across the frozen plain. He whispered, "This is the true fire, the fire that doesn't burn." And in that moment, across the vast white silence, he was no longer the exile. He was the guardian, the keeper of a new world, where wind, ice, and humankind breathed as one. Time passed swiftly, like snow melting on a cliff, when the first sunlight of spring touched it. Many years after the day he chose to remain in the north, the world had changed. The first village had grown into a city of ice, its transparent walls reflecting the aurora every night, glowing like 1,000 living torches. People lived with the snow, hunted in the wind, sang in the storm. No one feared the howl of the north anymore. They called this land by a new name, Argenheim, the place where the wind sleeps. But though the years changed, one story was still told again and again, around the fire every winter night, the tale of the Ice Knight, the man who stopped the last storm and brought breath back to the north. They said he was no ordinary man, but the spirit of the wind wearing a human form, one who walked through snow leaving no footprints, only trails of fire. Children grew up with that story, believing that if they were lost in a blizzard, they only had to find the red glow in the snow, the flame that never dies, and the Ice Knight would be near, guiding them home. The old told it with deeper voices, that the knight had once been exiled, betrayed, but instead of seeking revenge, he chose to protect those who once called him an enemy. And because of that, the wind forgave mankind. In the village where he once lived, descendants of those he had saved still remained. They built a statue of ice in the centre square, a figure in a long cloak, hand resting on a sword planted in the ground, head bowed slightly, eyes cast toward the horizon. But strangely, no one remembered his face. Some said his eyes were bright as steel, others said they were clear as ice. Some swore they had seen him in the storm, still young, still strong, walking silently through the snow, leaving behind a faint trail of warmth. Patrolmen crossing the deep snow sometimes found burned footprints on the ice, where the snow did not melt but glowed like embers. They never touched them. They only knelt and whispered, "He is still here." Legend said the Ice Knight never died. Whenever storms rose again, he would awaken, walking with the wind, carrying the old sword, the blade the wind had dulled but never broken. People said that on nights when the aurora burned red instead of green, he was fighting somewhere not against men, but against the darkness buried within the snow itself, the remnants of the old storm. Some claimed they had seen him standing atop an icy cliff, looking south, where the golden lights of ancient fortresses still flickered. But he never went there. He only watched, then turned away, as one who knew that victory was not conquest but forgetting. The tale of him spread far beyond the ice, reaching even the merchants from the south. They didn't believe it until one stormy night, their caravan was lost in the blizzard. At the moment of despair, they saw through the white chaos a faint red glow moving slowly ahead. They followed it through the night, and when the wind died, they found themselves standing before the gates of Argenheim. When they turned back, no one was there, only a trail of scorched marks on the snow stretching to the horizon. From then on, southern traders gave the north a new name, the Land of the Undying. Generation after generation, the legend of the Ice Knight became myth. Children were born already knowing the old song, the man who walks in snow, with fire following behind, holding the wind, eyes on the sky, his breath makes winter bloom. When spring came rare, but real and ice flowers bloomed on the snow, their petals clear as glass and fragrant as breath. People said they marked the knight's footsteps before he left, and the elders, those who lived long enough to see 2 seasons pass, believed he never left at all. They said that whenever the wind suddenly changed direction, carrying strange warmth, it was because the knight was passing through the village only to see if the world he once built was still alive. On the coldest nights, when snow fell without sound, the people lit fires in the square and placed an empty chair beside the embers. They called it the seat of the wind keeper. They said nothing, only sat in silence. The wind would pass through, tilting the flame to one side, as if someone had just walked by. And so the belief endured, needing no proof, no sight. Because sometimes people don't need a god, only a story to remind them that even in the fiercest blizzard, someone is still guarding their light. And if one night the wind rises again and the aurora burns crimson across the sky, the elders will smile and tell the children, "He walks again. He has never left us." Perhaps they are right. For somewhere, deep within the uncharted ice, a man in white still walks in silence. Each step he takes leaves a faint glow before it fades. No one knows if he is alive or only the spirit of the north, but he walks still, not for vengeance, not for honor, but because the world still needs a guardian to keep balance between wind and fire. And when the light of the aurora merges with his breath, the snow turns to mist, the ice reflects red, and the whole sky ignites like dawn in the heart of winter. In that moment, the wind whispers, soft as a song. The man who walks through snow leaves a trail of fire, the Ice Knight, the one who never dies. And so, The story of the ice night reaches its end, or rather, the place where the wind pauses only to breathe, before it moves on again. The storyteller stands there, in the vast white plain, where the aurora stretches like a violet-green silk ribbon across the sky, shining down upon the ice, cracking faintly beneath his feet. The breath of the wind still lingers thin and cold, sliding through every strand of hair, every fold of clothing, carrying with it the sound of the past. I look around. No more tower, no more footprints. Only faint traces of light upon the snow embers nearly gone, but still enough to illuminate a narrow path through the white night. The wind whispers past my ear, like a familiar voice. You've heard it now, haven't you? That story isn't only mine, it belongs to all who've ever been lost in the snow. I smile, lifting my gaze toward the far horizon, where sky and earth blend with no boundary between. The story of the ice night of one betrayed who chose to forgive, of one who could kill but chose to save, has passed through centuries, through countless breaths, reaching me like a wind that never tires. I don't know if it's real. No one does. But here, in this boundless silence, I feel as though I can hear the heartbeat of the land, a slow, deep pulse, as if even the snow is alive and listening with me. I kneel, pressing my hand to the surface of the ice. It's numbingly cold, yet beneath it, there's something warmer. Perhaps the breath of those who once walked here, or merely a trick of solitude lingering too long. I close my eyes, and for a moment, I see the man himself, a figure cloaked in white, walking quietly through the wind, moving through time as if it no longer mattered. He doesn't speak, doesn't look back, only walks, leaving behind a faint trail of fire. And I hear his voice, not from the air, but from within me. The wind will change, the ice will melt, but the question remains. I open my eyes. The world before me is still white. Snow falls softly, each flake small as ash. I don't know how long I've stood here, a few minutes, or a lifetime. I only know that the story is still here, in the air, in my breath. And I understand it was never just one man's story. It belongs to everyone who's ever been cast away from where they belonged, betrayed, or forced to choose between returning to the past or staying to build something new. I rise, the wind growing stronger, carrying the echo of the aurora above. The violet light pours down, brushing the ice like a hand from the heavens. Everything is so still that I can hear my own heartbeat. I smile, faintly, into the wind. Maybe every story is just wind born to be told, then to drift away. But before it drifts away, the storyteller must ask, because that's the nature of legends. They never truly end. They live on in the choices of those who listen. I stare straight into the endless white before me, my voice rough with cold but clear. If it were you, what would you do? I pause, letting the wind carry the question farther, dissolving it into the mist. Would you return southward, to the land of fire, of people, of light, where those who betrayed you still sit in comfort, unaware of what's been lost? Or would you stay here, in the frozen silence, where there's only solitude, but where life itself is quietly awakening? I take a few steps forward, the ice cracking beneath my boots, each sound like an uncertain answer from the earth itself. If you go back, the wind will stop with you. If you stay, the wind will keep blowing. There's no right, no wrong. Only the wind and humanity choosing which way to go. I look up. The aurora still dances, twisting like ribbons of light across the sky. They neither fade nor rest, they only change shape, just like this story. And as the wind brushes past, I hear faint sounds within it, the ringing of metal, laughter, the voices of children, and footsteps crunching through snow. Far away. Perhaps it's him. Perhaps memory. Or maybe just my own echo, repeating what the wind once told. I turn to leave, but stop. A small line of red, glowing like ember, flickers across the snow behind me. The wind blows harder, yet the light doesn't die. It spreads, forming a thin trail stretching toward the horizon. I stare at it, feeling something rise inside, not fear, not hope, but a strange calm, as if the answer had always been there. I whisper, letting the wind carry it away. Maybe I'll stay too. Because when the wind passes through this land, it doesn't ask who tells the story or who listens. It only needs someone to stand here, among the ice, to keep the story alive. I turn to the unseen listeners, perhaps sitting around a fire somewhere, or in a warm room, and my voice softens, almost to a whisper. Now you know, the story never ends, it only changes its teller. I breathe deeply, feeling the cold fill my chest, and speak one last time, slowly, clearly, like an oath. If it were you, would you return or stay, here, among the ice? The wind rises, carrying the question upward, all the way to the aurora, where it scatters into the air, leaving me standing alone in the white expanse, the light reflecting in my eyes, and the small flame still burning faintly behind me, a sign that though the story has ended, the ice night remains. Somewhere out there, with the wind, the snow, and those who still believe in the light that endures the long night. If you're still here, it means your heart is beating in rhythm with the stories of the night. Hit subscribe and join me on the next journey, where every shadow hides a secret waiting to be awakened. And now, turn down the lights, let your mind drift, and let sleep take you away. Sleep well for tonight, the world is still whispering.